go from there. Richard Posner wrote that the American public worries more about invasion of privacy than about summary proceedings against suspected terrorists, curtailments of the freedom of speech of the law-abiding, or the right of the media to publish government secrets. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Why or why not? And to what extent, if any, is privacy in jeopardy today? What protection, if any, do people have from privacy violations by government or business? You may begin.
Thank you. By continuing to listen to this speech, you have automatically accepted our user agreement and thus forfeited your right to score us anything below a 60.
Sophie's statement is not much of an exaggeration of the technological world we live in today. Business Insider reports that 90% of people click agree without reading a website's fine print.
This is hardly surprising since according to Carnegie Mellon, the number of user agreements the average person agrees to every year would take 76 workdays to read. With technology's pervasive presence, there is a growing sense of urgency for protecting privacy rights.
However, Richard Posner's blanket statement about the American public does not capture the whole picture. One clear example is the generational divide. Pew Research found that while 18 to 30-year-olds feel they have more control over who can access their data, individuals over 65 are more willing to grant government access to data in order to assess national security threats.
We therefore disagree with the notion that the paramount concern of all American citizens is privacy.
In 1967, Justice Harlan's concurring opinion in Katz v. U.S. recognized the Fourth Amendment's reasonable expectation of privacy. Florida v. Riley, 1989, lowered this expectation, affirming that law enforcement does not need warrants to observe individuals' property from public airspace. Yet, more recent cases, such as Carpenter v. U.S. 2018, stated that law enforcement does need warrants to analyze cell phone records.
Thus, we assert that the boundaries for Fourth Amendment protections are ever evolving, especially in the information age, and in certain situations, privacy rights are put in jeopardy.
Modern concerns regarding government infringement of privacy rights are mainly rooted in the USA Patriot Act of 2001. This act greatly increased the ease with which American government can monitor its citizens to assess terrorist threats, often using external threats to national security to justify abridging individual rights.
However, this is not a new issue. For instance, Korematsu v. U.S. 1944 infamously upheld national security as a justification to place Japanese Americans into internment camps. Currently, the focus on privacy issues has shifted to user data collection by private companies.
In 2018, senators harshly criticized Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, for the company's failure to inform 87 million users that political consulting firms were harvesting their data. Growing bipartisan support for regulating tech companies reflects the pressure representatives face to protect citizens' privacy.
At the state level, the California Consumer Privacy Act ensured an individual's right to know what information companies collect. Internationally, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation penalizes companies which fail to protect collected data from misuse or exploitation.
Likewise, businesses can limit the government's access to data. For example, following the 2014 San Bernardino shooting, law enforcement urged Apple to create a backdoor to data on the shooter's iPhone.
Apple denied the request in favor of consumer privacy, claiming that a backdoor would undermine the privacy of millions of Apple users. While the FBI did eventually obtain the information, the difficulty and expense may limit the government's ability to do this in many cases.
Lastly, the American people themselves still hold power. In 9/11's aftermath, the TSA enlisted Delta Airlines to test a program in which customers faced background checks and received risk assessment scores based on undisclosed information. As a result, Americans boycotted, leading to the program's suspension.
Although it may seem impossible to escape the scope of technology, we must remember that we the people still hold the power over our individual information. Even in strenuous times like these, it is crucial that we remain active in the protection of our data, because those user agreements aren't going to read themselves. Thank you. We are now ready for your questions.
Great, thank you. There's so much to digest there, so let's just jump in. And you talked about the current COVID-19 situation in general, which is why we're all here doing what we're doing. How should courts analyze the idea of contact tracing and monitoring movements of people in the name of public safety and public health, and also weigh that versus the individual privacy concerns? Do you think that the courts have the tools in order to do that?
So in Jacobson v. Massachusetts, we saw that the court upheld mandatory vaccines to prevent the smallpox outbreak from expanding. So I think that it's important that we look to things like that, where the courts have said that public health comes above personal liberties and rights. So while some people disagreed with getting that vaccine, the government felt that it was a big enough threat to each individual citizen that it was worth abridging those individual rights. So I think that we're in a very similar place with the government having to weigh those issues.
And again, in 1902, there was another case, Compagnie Française de Navigation à Vapeur v. Louisiana Board of Health, that also weighed public health versus those individual rights. And this determined that quarantine was actually constitutional, state quarantines. So again, public health was put above those individual rights.
We can see this on an international level as many countries throughout the world are expanding these type of app tracing software that you have said, such as with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who stated that they're imposing such imperative tracking material that they're only employing these as similar to terrorists, and some of these will be as invasive and infringe on the privacy of those affected. So these are very stringent and very severe cases of which we see today.
Thank you.
So if Sophia and Ford, to pick up on kind of the examples you just cited, if Apple decided to share all iPhone users' location data with public health authorities, who then used that to implement fever camps like we've seen in China, where if your location data, they can target you, take your temperature, and then put you in quarantine. Do you feel like that's constitutional today based on the examples you cited?
I would personally believe that that would be a bit of a stretch at the place where we are right now. I think that that's a possibility looking if it became even worse than what we're already seeing the situation being. But I think that the public health risk would have to be even higher, because I think if they did try to do that, you would see a lawsuit go forward. And I think that the courts would have to answer that question. But they have given you that right to privacy under the penumbrum of the First, Third, Fourth, Ninth, and 14th Amendments. And so I think that abridging that right, it has to be a very, very serious issue and threat to public health.
Did Congress suspend habeas corpus as a way of establishing fever camps?
I think that would be the only way that they would be able to do it. I think they would have to suspend habeas corpus. So I don't think that you can just, I don't think they would be willing to do it without suspending habeas corpus, because I do think you would end up in massive legal battles over that.
Sorry. I also think it's important to acknowledge the different kind of spirits of the nations in China versus the United States. I think that the American people would be much more willing to push back on their government, especially if they felt like individual rights were being abridged. Even now, we can see that there are protests in Michigan, those gridlock protests, where people are going out in their cars to protest stay-at-home orders. I personally don't agree with it, but it's kind of comforting to see that people are pushing back against what they believe to be an invasion of their individual rights.
And it's always difficult to see what the future holds while we are in the time of crisis writing history. We see that with the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln, like you said, threw away those habeas corpus rights because they were in a time of extreme panic. And we see that with Korematsu, where they had those Japanese internment camps. While today we may see, looking back on it, that it was quite intrusive and unconstitutional, but during those times, it was extremely scary and frightening for the American public, and such more severe tasks were handled then.
So what if we put the government aside and Facebook decides that all Instagram users, if I'm walking on the sidewalk with Sophia and she's tested positive for COVID-19, I get a little push notification on my phone to tell me about her personal health information. Thoughts on that? Should that be legal? Is it legal?
So I think that the issue is going to be when you agree to these user agreements that these companies make you sign, people don't realize always what they're signing.
Well, they don't make you sign them. They give you the opportunity to sign them. And that's an important distinction, or is it?
I think it is, but I also think that it kind of is almost like for my generation, where that is the way that you're plugged in. And I think that it's important to be a part of that, especially like for college stuff, I have to be on those platforms in order to look for a roommate and to get plugged in with different individuals. Like the schools kind of require that. That's one of the things I had to do when I was, after I got accepted. And so I didn't really have an option of that. And also, if you want to use those applications, you do have to agree to those terms of service.
Even if Google were to do something like that, everyone in our school system would automatically, in a way, be signed up for it, because in order to use our online classes, we have to use all forms of Google. We use Google Drive. All of our essays are on there, and we submit our assignments on Google Classroom. So in a way, it can be involuntary sometimes.
Oh, is that, so that
government or the state or private industry? Oh, so time is up. I'm sorry.
we're going to assume you would have had a similarly great answer to that question as you've had to the other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. First, that was awesome. Number one, well, there's so many things. I mean, and I'll just give a little bit of feedback and we'll go through the other judges. I really appreciated the energy. We're on our second to last one, and that I have some caffeine here, I have to confess, but that was awesome. It was great. And I really appreciated your energy and excitement for this. It certainly came through even virtually. So that was great. Your opening was awesome. I love that. I mean, you know, it captured everything so well and so sort of, you know, clever in how you did it. That was awesome. The depth of knowledge, it was, you know, we covered things that we hadn't covered in other areas because you could, and you led us there, and you had great comments about a lot of in-depth things. Again, you'll hear it probably from all of us. I wish we had more time. The idea of ever-evolving standards and situations and where we are. You brought in Korematsu and some historical references as well. I have so many things like circled on my paper here that I'm trying to cover them quickly so I can give my other judges some time. But the idea, I also appreciated your reference to Israel, another democracy, as opposed to, you know, maybe China or other countries that aren't necessarily similar to our system, how they're dealing with it and what they have to do. But, you know, within your governmental context and how your government is organized can create different challenges or opportunities to be able to deal with something that we're all dealing with. And so it's almost like the, you know, federalism on an international scale and the idea of, you know, laboratories of maybe not democracy, but how everybody's dealing with this and how people are more equipped and frankly, what trade-offs are made, because that's, you know, this right versus that right. A lot of times that's what the push and pull is. And you did a very good job of talking about that. And it was clear your depth of knowledge was extremely deep. And so thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I love when students tell us what their planned majors are, because I think it's good insight into how you kind of might be oriented to viewing a question like this. And I think it really came through. We heard a fair amount about international law, both in the prepared remarks and the follow-ups, but just the right amount, like not too much of a distraction, right? Because we're here to talk about what's going on in the States, and then obviously teasing into or teasing out kind of what is the right balance with all of these corporations that are, you know, making money off of our data. Ford, I thought your point about colleges and universities kind of requiring you to be on social media was very apt. Good point to bring that in. I had no idea. And I work in this industry writing terms of service and privacy policies for users that I know they won't read. So I really, really enjoyed talking about this. Could have spent another hour doing so with you all, because you had such a good command of the knowledge. And Jacobson, like what, that was the kind of a random tangent that wasn't random at all, because you were prepared for the question we asked you, but you might not have necessarily anticipated that. You guys did an excellent job.
So you guys come from a high school with a great We the People tradition, and you guys were more than up to the task of carrying that torch. Your opening was as good as any I've heard. I loved the way it started with telling us that, by clicking that we were obligated to give you a 60. It was sort of clever, but you know, it was but like really on point. Just a sort of an I would say erudite. I mean, the reference to Justice Harlan's concurrence in Griswold, Riley, Carpenter, the EU. I mean, I've just got a long list. Yeah, Jacobson. That was just a great touch. The Louisiana quarantine case. Just on and on and on. So that was sort of all impressive, and I liked the way your opening ended with these agreements aren't going to read themselves. But so just